Well, let's talk some business things. You at times have referenced passages that refer in the New Testament to slaves and masters. How should we understand those terms? Is the Bible implicitly endorsing slavery, or should we just understand that it's workers and bosses?
The Bible throughout never condones involuntary servitude or capturing someone to work who is against his will, which was American slavery. And in the book of Exodus, he who steals a man and sells him shall be put to death. So, and the New Testament in 1 Timothy 1 lists a number of sins. The law is laid down for the lawless and disobedient, ungodly, sinners, 1 Timothy 1:9, unholy and profane, for those who strike their fathers and mothers, for murderers, the sexually immoral, men who practice homosexuality, enslavers. Now, we translated I'm on the ESV translation committee, and the Greek word there means people who capture others to make them slaves or who are involved in the slave trade. And so we used an unusual word, enslavers, thinking that it might not be a common word, but people know what it means when they hear it. If the King James Version had translated that enslavers, it would have changed history.
Wow.
But they translated man-stealers, and people thought it had to do with kidnapping or something like that, but didn't relate it to slavery. So just the translation of one word. So the Bible is consistently opposed to involuntary capturing people to be in slavery and to the abuse of slaves. Now, in the first century world, there was an employment function called a doulos, D-O-U-L-O-S, which is translated servant or slave or bondservant in the New Testament. It was not like American slavery in that people who had high degrees of responsibility were I would call it a bondservant, a doulos. Like in the parable of the talents, 1 talent, 2 talents, and 5 talents are entrusted to these servants. That's doulos. Well, modern equivalent, that's the 5 talents is about $2 million. So the master says, here's $2 million to this servant, and then goes off to a far country. And in the first century, this doulos, they were teachers, they were foremen, they were shop managers, they were physicians. They had oftentimes high degree of responsibility. Many people would voluntarily enter into that because on average, by age 30, the Oxford Classical Dictionary says they could expect to buy their freedom. So it was a way to gain regular employment. They were a much higher social category than the day laborers who went into the market each day hoping to find work, but didn't have regular employment. And there was a separate system of Roman law that protected these people against certain defrauding and abuse, and they were paid and they had their own possessions. So the modern equivalent, but the thing about it was, once you were a doulos, you couldn't quit. You couldn't change employers. So the modern equivalent, closest equivalent that I can think in today's society is military service, where you sign up for a certain length of time and then you can't get out. You're paid. There will be a time when you get out. There's a certain set of laws. There's a uniform code of military justice that you're subject to. There's military tribunals. So it's a separate judicial system, but you're protected. Now, it was something like that. It was the most common employment situation in the ancient world. So, no, the Bible doesn't condone slavery as we understand slavery today. Second, yes, it is the closest parallel to employer-employee relationships today. So the master-servant verses do apply directly to us.
Good. That's helpful. Well, how is one to behave in an economic structure where bribes are not only commonplace, but they're needed for businesses to succeed? Obviously, a place outside the U.S.
Yeah. I want to distinguish there, Ryan, between paying somebody to do wrong, which is always wrong, and paying someone to do what he ought to do anyway, like stamp your license or something like that. And I want to separate those because in the New Testament or the Bible, giving a bribe to a judge or an official is to persuade the person to make a wrong judgment. A bribe is paying someone to do wrong. And I think we should never do that. And companies doing business in foreign countries have to say, if I have to do that, then I'm not going to do business there. But paying someone because he's just expecting a tip before he does the service tip. If it's just paying the person to do what he ought to do, I have less problem with that. We give tips afterward.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think calling them all bribes and putting them all in the same category is the most helpful. It doesn't allow precision of thinking. Does that help?
Yeah.
I don't know who
That's
asked
good.
the question.
That's good.
If you ask the question, I'm not answering, you want to follow up, just ask Randy. Ask Ryan.